السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا مرحبا بكم. Welcome to our next lesson. Uh, okay, this should be recorded and you should be able to see a screen in front of you, insha'Allah ta'ala. So, we're starting a new topic, if you like, today. And we're moving on to another section of the usul of usul al-Shashi, if you like. And what we're going to be looking at in today's lesson is what's called huruf ma'ani. Huruf ma'ani. And I'm going to take you on a slow journey in this lesson just to explain what it is, and so you get the idea. Huruf, maybe put the word properly. Huruf al-ma'ani. Al-ma'ani. They're called huruf al-ma'ani. And that's the topic of today's lesson, inshaAllah ta'ala. So, huruf al-ma'ani, the word huruf are particles. And I'll explain what particles in. If you're doing grammar already, you'll know what it is. It comes from a singular harf, and the plural is huruf. And ma'ani, meanings. Ma'ani, meanings. And in usul al-fiqh, particles have significant consequences. I'll explain what particles are in a moment, but just for your benefit, just a quick recap for those of you who might be a little bit rusty in grammar. Normally, a sentence is, or a word rather, let's be more precise. A word is made of three parts. In English, we say a noun, a name, a verb, or it's made of a particle. So if I say Harun is eating, Harun is a noun, is the particle, the word that joins nouns and verbs together, and eating is the verb, it's a doing word. Okay, so just to remind you of that, just to kind of make sure that we're kind of understanding where particles are coming from. And so they have significant implications, as we will see in this lesson and going forward, in terms of the rulings due to their relative meanings. So meanings, something that we're going to be learning, inshaAllah ta'ala. Okay, so at the beginning, of course, what we did was we went on a journey and we looked at important terms in usul al-fiqh. Then we looked at, towards the end, practical steps to unravel the true meaning and purpose of text. And then just before this episode, we looked at some weak and incorrect techniques resulting in incorrect deductions, if you like, from a text. So huruf al-ma'ani are very, very important, and a ruling can hinge upon the presence of a particular particle. We'll go through them. And particles, or huruf al-ma'ani, are basically two types. Just two types, really. And the first type has 7 of them. We'll go through each one by one. And the second type has 4 of them. And huruf al-ma'ani can be what's called conjunctions. I'll explain what that means in a second. Or they can be prepositions. If you're doing some logic with me on my Hujjah Academy channel, you'll see there's similarities between what we're doing here and what we're doing in mantiq or in logic. But let's go back to usul al-fiqh here. So there are 2 types of huruf al-ma'ani: huruf al-atifa, which are conjunctions, or huruf al-jarra, or jarra rather, jarra, which are prepositions. I've not given you Arabic, but that's the Arabic there. So atifa and huruf al-jarra. And so there's 11 altogether. 7 plus 4 equals 11. And 7 of them are conjunctions, and 4 of them are what's called prepositions, not propositions. There's a difference. Propositions is something that we look at in the science of logic. Okay, so if you're studying mantiq with me, you'll know there's a difference in there. I'm just pointing this out because some people will be watching this and they'll be studying mantiq, for example. Okay, so our discussion is going to begin with conjunctions. Why? Well, because in the Arabic language, they combine usually. they combine both verbs and nouns in Arabic. Whereas in prepositions, it's really nouns only. Okay. And of course, conjunctions are more general and far-reaching. They have more importance as a result. And the first one we're going to be discussing is the particle. So the first one we're going to be looking at is al-waw, yeah? Or just wow, if you like, but we write it like this. Okay. And what do we need to know about it before we dive into? So this is the first of the 11 or the first of the 7 of the conjunctions. So the wow is discussed first, which is what we're going to do, because we use it as a default for a wow. It's unrestricted, so we don't restrict it to anything, and we use it as unconditioned. That's a default. But we will see there's always, as in everything, there's always exceptions. But you start with the default, and then you make sense. So there's unrestricted and unconditioned. So it takes precedence over all the other ones. I hope that's okay as a starting introduction. Just for ma'ani, huruf al-ma'ani, again, I said to you, these are meaningful particles. These are parts of speech, and they hold specific and significant meanings. Huruf al-atifa, so this one here, huruf al-atifa, what we call conjunctions. These are particles that are used to connect clauses in coordination or subordination. We'll do that in a second. And the ones that we will cover later on are prepositions, which are this one here. And these are followed by nouns, making them genitive. We'll come across that later on, inshallah ta'ala. Let's dive into it, because this is the theory. And of course, one of the ways that you can learn all of this is by getting into some examples. Now, the particle wow, or al-wow, if you want to be correct, is used for conjoining. We use a different color. So when you say wow, think about English. When you say and, you're joining what is before the and what is after that. So if you say apples and pears, you're joining apple and pears. So it's used for what's called conjoining. Joining, co-joining, or conjoining. Yeah. So whatever is before the wow and whatever is after it. So if you say in English, for example, apple and pears, apple would have been a noun on its own. And if I say and pears, I'm joining what comes after the and with what comes before it. So it's called a conjoining particle. It's doing something. Okay. So we have the same in Arabic. The wow is used. We call it waw al-atf. So it's singular is the word atf. Yeah, that's why you have atifa here for the plural. Yeah. So it's an atf. It's joining, conjoining. Now, what's the ruling of this? Well, if you read in the books of details of usul al-fiqh, they'll tell you a few things. When we look at waw al-atf, we do not consider three things I'll mention now. One of them is the order in which they appear. Second thing is proximity. Oh, can't spell proximity. The third one is delay. Okay, so we're going to go and do an example just to help you. So they do not consider that. If I say, for example, Zaid and Amr came, so Zaid wa Amr yaji'u. Zaid and Amr came. It does not mean that Zaid came first. It doesn't necessarily mean that Zaid and Amr came in that particular order, right? It just gives you the idea that Zaid and Amr came. That's what it means. Yeah. It just gives you the idea that they both came. They could have come separately. So Zaid could have come and Amr. So it doesn't have to be together. Yeah. Or they could have come in different order. Amr could have come first and Zaid. Right. It doesn't mean that Zaid came and Amr came later, or Amr came and Zaid came later. It just means there's this idea of coming in the case of Zaid and Amr came. So for the Hanafis, this is important. Our friend, the Shafi'is, or our friends, the Shafi'is, they would say that no, it is an order. There's a tertib to it. There's an order to it. So this is where we disagree. Now, if you're going to disagree on this principle, then of course you're going to have differences in the practice, in the particulars of fiqh. This is when usul al-fiqh and furu' al-fiqh come together. So the usul is what we're learning here, and through the examples we're learning how they practically impact the furu' of fiqh. That's very, very important to bear in mind. Okay, so let's look at example Imam Shafi'i. If you perform wudu or ablution, in the Quran, Allah says, Jalla wa ala, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, or you who believe, when you get ready for prayer or when you stand for prayer, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, wash your face, وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ, then, so the face, hands, فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ, so wrong order, hands, face, elbow, and then obviously in terms of what's farz, what's an obligation, and then the final one is obviously the feet. Yeah. So we say when you have there's a atf in there. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu idha kuntum ila as-salati faghsilu wujuhakum wa aydiyakum. The wow's there. Ila al-marafiqi wa amsahu bi ru'usikum wa arjulakum. So we say, because we're Hanafis, we say we don't consider the order. So whichever order you do it in, it's fine, right? Whereas Imam Shafi'i says you have to do it in that particular order. So in this verse number 6 of Surah Al-Ma'idah, they would say that you have to do it in particular order: face, arm, head, and feet. You have to do it in that particular order. And according to him, it's for conjoining. So you must follow that order, conjoining an order. So you must follow that. Okay. So there's a farq between us and the Shafi'is. Let's take another example. If we say the wow, all a wow does is just conjoining, right? So let's take another example. If somebody says to his wife, so somebody says to his wife, if you speak to Zaid and Amr, you are divorced. So if you speak to Zaid and Amr, you are divorced. So the question you have to ask yourself is if you speak to Zaid, what comes before the and Amr afterwards, are they both together, or they conjoining, or are they both separate? Yeah. So somebody said to his wife, if you speak to Zaid and Amr, you are divorced. And then the wife goes and speaks to Amr first and then Zaid. So she does it the other way around. So what does she do? If you speak to Zaid and Amr, Zaid and Amr, right? And then she goes and speaks to Amr first, right? According to us, divorce, because we don't take the consideration of order. According to the Shafi'is, of course, yeah, obviously the order is important. For us, the divorce, it happens. It doesn't matter which order she did it in, or she spoke to Zaid and then she spoke to Amr later, or she spoke to Amr and then later on she spoke to Zaid. It doesn't matter. The moment she does it, she speaks to Zaid and Amr, the divorce will take place. Similarly, if somebody said to their wife, if you enter this house and this house, so if you enter this house, and I'm just going to put cross there for and this house, then result will be divorce. So she enters the second house. So this is number M. She goes to the second house first. Then she walks out and goes to this house, the first house. The divorce will still occur because we're not considering the order. Okay. So this is important. So basically, to summarize before we move on, you might want to pause the video after I just explained this. For us, what we do is the Hanafis, we do what's called Jam Mutlaq. Yeah, or let's just grammatically correct. Al-Jam Al-Mutlaq. Yeah, for the Hanafis. For the Shafi'is, they follow what's called the Tartib. That's it. That's what you really need to know now for Atf. Nothing more, nothing extra to worry about. Okay, we've learned the basics. Let's get into some of the details. Okay, so as always in fiqh, you learn the basic principles and then you kind of work out the details. So sometimes what happens is the wow is used metaphorically. Metaphorically speaking, we've done metaphors already. Sometimes, not always. And if it's used in that case, we'll kind of look at it as a circumstantial phrase. I'll explain what that means through an example. But for now, let's just use this word, circumstantial phrase, if it's used metaphorically. Okay. Circumstantial phrase. And just to give you a bit of grammar, if you like, this is what you call the hal. And the hal is called, if you like, the state. It's circumstantial. And it's usually say as part of a noun, right? And it kind of functions as a conditional sentence. Because what the hal does is kind of like a limiter. It kind of makes it conditional. We'll go for an example and you'll see it. It makes it conditional. Or it makes it a conditional sentence in the state of this. Okay. Because what happens is the circumstance al-hal is conjoined with the individual, and the phrase then functions as a conditional sentence because the circumstance al-hal acts as a limiter and restriction for the individual. And usually the individual is like the Zulhal, the person who you are referring to. Zulhal. So it's like it's expressed with a condition. It's a bit like what we have in Arabic, and the shart, like a condition, is connected to the final clause. So like if I say to you, if you walk outside, if the sun rises, light will come out. One thing happens, something happens. If you look at me, I will shout at you. Right. So if you do this, this will happen. If you open your mouth, sounds will come out. So it's a bit like that. And we have this in grammar as well. And we call this obviously shart. And that's the jaza. We have this in Arabic as well. So it's a bit similar to that. The idea, if you like, it's a bit similar to that. Okay. So for example, if I say to you, and the way you think about it is like it's conditional. So think of it as a condition. So like somebody says to you, give me £1,000, and so they said the and, the wow atf, you are free. So your question you have to ask yourself is, are they both separate things? Are they saying give me £1,000, and they're saying you are free? Are they two separate things? So the question we have to ask ourselves is, are these two separate things? Our default would say they are two separate things. Right? Give me £1,000. You give them £1,000. If you're a slave, for example, then you'll be free. Or is it that when you give me £1,000, then you'll be free? Yeah. So what you do is look at a condition. Now, if I say this too, so you look at a circumstance. This is the key thing here, right? So if this sentence is said to a slave, right? If the person says this to a slave, this whole sentence is said to a slave, right? And the slave he has a permission to earn. He's called a ma'zun in Arabic, right? This will be understood as a condition for his freedom. So when you give 1,000, if you like, 1,000 free. When this happens, this is the output. This is what will happen, right? Because that's what happens. So it's like you're saying if. So if you want to think about it, this is why I brought this example here of the jaza and shart. If, let me do a different color. It's almost like the person saying, if you give me £1,000, then you are free. Yeah, or if you give £1,000, you are free. So if you do this, this will happen. So if he gives £1,000, he'll be free. Okay. That's what he's saying. Imam Muhammad, just to kind of mix it up a little bit, so I'll put him here as an M. He does say that so let's give an example. Let's look at an example. He says that, says a Muslim leader, he's a Muslim leader, and he says he instructs a group of non-believers. So, they're in a castle. In this castle here, and here's a door. Right. Well, I know castles now are just for looking at and admiring, but say if he says that. So if he says to a group of non-believers that if you open the gates, if you open the gates, oh sorry, he's instructing them here. Sorry, I've done it wrong way around. Let me go back. He's instructing them, open the gates and you are free. The question we have to ask ourselves is this separate? Is he saying open the gates and you're free as well? So he's not making a condition at the moment the way we're seeing it. So if they open the gate, they open the gate and they're free as well. They're two separate things. Or is it that if you open the gate, then you'll be free? In other words, if you don't open the gate and we come in and we forced in, you won't be free. Okay. So if you look at this, it's circumstantial. He's obviously surrounded the castle, and the circumstantial idea will tell you that he doesn't mean it literally, he means in a metaphorical sense. So he says that if he's making a condition that if you open the gate, it's a conditional sentence now. If you open the gate, right, you'll be safe. But if you don't, you won't be safe. Right? Or like, if he says to, say they're fighting, and he says to the enemy, descend, right, and you are safe. So you look at a sentence. So you're going to ask yourself, are these two separate things? Right? Normally, the default is that they are seen as separate. But you've got to look at the context. Yeah? So if the combatant, the one that you're fighting with, comes down, then they're safe, because you know this from the circumstance. Okay, so it's almost like we're saying, descend, you are safe in the state that you descend. If you descend, then you'll be free. Yeah. Now, there's just two things I want to mention here. How do we really know this? I mean, I've just given you a flavor of it, but how do we know to take on the metaphor? When do we know that we move to the metaphorical meaning? Well, number one, clearly we've established, number one, circumstance. We'll know from the circumstance. Yeah. And I would just write the word here, indicator. There's something indicating in the sentence that you're moving from the literal to the metaphorical. Okay. And in the two examples that I've given, or the three examples that I've given, clearly there's circumstantial indicators, and they're telling you that. Okay. Because the master says to the slave, give me 1,000 and you are free. What's the suitability of the indicator? Financial compensation is a suitable condition for the emancipation of a slave. And the slave has been granted independence to earn his own money. So this takes away the meaning of it being conjoining, right? It takes away the meaning that give me 1,000, and it takes away the idea that give me 1,000 and you are free, are two separate things. He'll be free when he gives 1,000. Yeah. If the particle was for mere conjoining, the first part of the sentence would be independent, this one here, and the second, it is independent of the second one. So it would mean that give me 1,000 and you are free are separate things. For the master really to ask for a slave who already earns him money to give him money is pointless in of itself, right? And then you add to that he would also be freeing him. This is clearly not the case. So we know from the context. So when the literal meaning becomes problematic, there's indicators that are telling us something else, we abandon it. So words are also known from circumstantial indicators. What's actually going on? This is why when you read usul al-fiqh or hadith or anything, you need to bear in mind the circumstance. Sahih? Okay. So that's that one. Let me add one more interesting facet for you before we conclude the lesson. Now, we've just said that circumstantial indicators are important. And we said that we can go from the literal to the metaphorical based on circumstantial indicators that tell us that the literal should be abandoned and so forth. Okay. There's another one that's useful that can help you as well, that will guide you. And this is the second one, I guess, is that when not feasible. It's just not feasible. This doesn't work. Okay. So, and where it's feasible, the metaphorical is not possible. Okay. So it's important to bear this in mind. Let me repeat this. We've talked about going from literal to metaphorical in the previous slide, but we also have this idea of feasibility. Now, if it's not feasible to stick to literal, then we'll jump to the metaphorical. Yeah, like this. Or and where it is feasible, the metaphorical is not possible. So let me repeat again. The condition to take the particle wow out of the literal to meaning into the metaphorical is that the literal meaning must not be possible. And where it is feasible, and even if you can, so where it is feasible, the metaphorical is not possible. Where it's feasible, feasible, not metaphorical, not possible. Hold on, not possible. We'll go through these examples, inshallah, that will help. Stop there, just to kind of get that clear. So we'll go for an example, and inshallah it'll become clear. So let's take an example. If someone says to his wife, you are divorced, and so he's using a wow atf, of course. You are ill. Now look at the sentence. Maybe pause and work out what's going on here. Maybe you want to pause and try and work out answer. Where he says, you are divorced and you are praying. Okay. Pause the video and ask yourself the question, are they separate? Is this what appears before the wow, the and this separate? So is you are divorced separate, is giving her divorce, and him saying you are ill separate, so they're two separate things? Or is he saying you are divorced when you're ill? Okay. Or you are divorced when you start praying? Okay, so just ask yourself that question. Now, if we take the literal, so I'm going to put L here for literal. If we take the literal one, the literal idea, divorce will happen. Why? Because we take them both as two independently conjoined sentences. And this is a valid possibility. So this is separate from that one. The two separate sentences. Okay, and this is a valid possibility. But do we have a reason to go to the metaphorical? Do we have something that tells us that we should go to the metaphorical? Well, there's no reason. There's no cause. There's nothing to tell us to go to it. It's still feasible. It's still feasible to have this. It's still feasible to say you are divorced and you are ill. Right? So divorce will take place. So we've taken this, you are divorced. It's not you are divorced when you fall ill, it's you are divorced. The divorce will take place. And this is unconnected. This is unconnected. This is unconnected to the previous, the ma'tuf alayh, as we call it in grammar. The one that comes, the sentence, the phrase before it. Now, if the husband, when he said these words, he intended if husband, however, so here's the husband, he says, oh, well, I intended it to be metaphorical as a conditional sentence. So when you fall ill, if, like, he's basically saying you are divorced if you fall ill, right? Because this is also a possibility. With Allah, right? Valid. It's conditional, but not before the judge. So we have this in fiqh. You study this in ifta, not valid. Because the judge will only decide upon what's zahir. The reason the judge gives a rejection is that the intention of it is diverting the literal meaning, and in a chapter of divorce, this is not possible. In the court of Allah, he might be correct, but Allah knows what intentions are. Can you see? We have the basic principle here is that you keep them separate, unless you have a reason, circumstantial evidence, as we did in the previous slide, or you have something else that tells you, like here, that's not feasible. But that doesn't apply here, right? They can be applied as independent sentences. It's perfectly fine. Okay. Let me give you another example in different color. Just stick on the same page. So if somebody says to another person, take this £1,000 and take this £1,000. Sorry, take this £1,000 in what's called a mudaraba contract. I'll explain in a second. Mudaraba contract, and work with textiles. So apply the same principle here. We've got the wow here. We've got one sentence here. Well, one plus one, and then one here. And there's a wow in the middle that's conjoining them. Okay. So we've got to ask ourselves, is it possible from contextual indicators that these two might be joined? Or can we tell from some sort of feasibility understanding that they might be conjoined? The default is they're separate. The default would be that taking the £1,000 in mudaraba. So a mudaraba is basically a co-partnership. Co-partnership, where basically you make an agreement with certain partners and you put money in and you all get like you're entitled to a certain amount of profit. So like, one, you kind of put like one person would be the owner of stock, and maybe somebody might get something because he owns the employees and so forth. But what we want to work out here is that are these two separate? If somebody says take this £1,000 in mudaraba and work with textiles, is he saying take this £1,000 and he's saying I want you to work in textiles? Or is he saying that I want you to take this £1,000 and use it to work with textiles? So what do we do? Right? So we need to look at the feasibility. We need to look at the contextual indicators. So I want you to pause for a second, just have a think about it, pause the video perhaps, and then press play once you've had a think about it. Okay, and you can challenge me on this one because it is contextual. So here's what we're going to do. The ulama say, the scholars say in this example, that the work won't be restricted to textiles. Okay. So in other words, you can take that £1,000 and you can spend it in anything you want. So he's not saying take this. It's not conditional to textiles. It's not condition. It's not conditional. You can anywhere. You can invest it in anything. Why do they say that? The reason being is that from the understanding of the textile, this is a factory pumping out clean steam because we need to be eco-friendly. So it's pumping out clean steam. Okay. I don't want someone giving me a comment to say you're encouraging pollution. Anyway, so why is that? Well, the textile industry doesn't have the capacity. It doesn't have the capacity from contextual indicators for a joint venture where with £1,000, for a joint where with £1,000, because £1,000 will be given before the business begins. Because the £1,000 will be given before business begins. This means that the hal is coming before the thing that is supposed to be a circumstance for, and this is not possible as they should be present together. Right? So it's not working. It's you can't use £1,000. You don't. It doesn't work. Yeah. So the hal is coming before the thing that is supposed to be a circumstance for, and this is not possible as they should be present together. It's coming later on. So the words don't have the capacity to be part of a circumstantial phrase. So they're two separate sentences. Right? They're two separate sentences. Take the £1,000 in mudaraba, spend it however you want, and work in textile is separate. So it's not conditioned for it. We know this from the circumstance. Of course, the default always is that if there's no circumstantial indicators, there's no feasible indicators, then we will always take the wow as operative. That's a default. Okay. That's a default. So, if a woman says to her husband, she's saying to her husband, divorce me, and you have 1,000. You have 1,000. Right? So look at this. Does the divorce happen? Sorry, does he need to give 1,000? Is it what do you call it? If he divorces her, does he get 1,000? And the husband says, I'm going to give divorce. So gives her a divorce. Have a think about it. Pause it. Does the husband need to give her 1,000 or not? Have a think about it and play. Once you had to think about it. So you think about it, the husband gives a divorce. There'll be nothing to pay for the woman. Simple reason that the conditioning, the divorce with 1,000 has no bearing. These are two separate. This is separate. This is separate. Right? It's just her statement. So he's not obliged to anything. And the divorcing, the statement belongs to a woman, and the act of issuing divorce, the act is the husband's. The husband is giving the act of divorce. Divorce is his act. Remember. Because a man has independently issued the divorce. So they are both standalone statements. They are both standalone statements. They don't interfere with one another. So the issuance of the divorce will stand once the husband issues it, and it's unconnected to any conditions. There's no money necessary once it's been issued. She doesn't need to give it to him. Now let's just take a similar example and look at the difference to really make this clear for us. Now this is in the case of divorce. We look at the circumstances. We say it's different. But for example, say a man, he walks into a hotel. And he sees a porter by the hotel, someone who carries suitcases for you, for example. He's carrying suitcases for you. So he carries suitcase to your room for you, for example. Okay. And he says to the porter, pick up this luggage and you have a dirham. So if you pick up this luggage, you're gonna get £1. Okay. So are these two things separate? Is picking up the luggage and paying £1 separate? Does he pick up the luggage and he gives him £1? Or he only gives him £1 when he picks up the luggage? So you got to think about this, and I want you to pause again and think about this. So though the statement is from one person and the act of picking is from another person, the act is not independent of the instruction. As opposed to the previous one, the divorce one, right, is independent. The issuance of divorce is originally independent, right, when the wife says it, and not for financial gain from the husband, but carrying a load is dependent upon the instruction. Like, you'll get £1,000, contextually just if you lift the suitcase. And we know this because we also know from contextual indicators that this is what a porter does, right? If you said this, if you said to some guy that's randomly standing there in the hotel, and he's just, he's a customer, then that's different. The porter tells you this because he gets paid to do stuff like this. So this has to be flexibility there. There has to be a flexibility there. Okay. I hope that makes sense. Of course, if you have any questions, please ask, and we will stop there, inshallah ta'ala. And I'll see you next week. Subhanallah bihamdihi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika. نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك.